I think it's time to return back home.
Mito did not just get nervous inside that wedding chapel. He looked at Debby, looked at the future she was already planning, and said it might be time for him to go back home. That one sentence did more than stop a wedding conversation. It exposed the biggest problem in their entire relationship. Debby believed they were moving toward marriage. Mito looked like he was still deciding whether he even wanted the life that came with it. But the most concerning part was not only what Mito said, it was how shocked Debby appeared to be. This was a man who had struggled to say he loved her, had not given her the kind of proposal she wanted, and became more excited talking about acting than talking about their relationship. Debby herself noticed that difference. She knew serious conversations were being avoided, yet she still seemed completely unprepared when Mito finally admitted that he could not find himself in America. And here is where the story gets even more complicated. Credible public record reporting later indicated that Debby and Mito did get legally married. So this chapel disaster was apparently not their final ending. That means the real question is not simply, did Mito want to leave? The bigger question is, what changed after this? Did they finally solve the real problem? Or did Debby accept another temporary promise because the visa clock was running out? Was Mito rejecting Debby, rejecting New Orleans, or rejecting a version of America that did not match his Hollywood dream? Because this was never just a normal argument. It was a clash between commitment and ambition, reassurance and pressure, love and opportunity. And by the end of the episode, it became impossible to ignore one uncomfortable possibility. Maybe Debby and Mito were planning the same wedding. But imagining two completely different marriages, Debby and Mito had already faced communication problems before this moment. Their time together in America had not exactly looked peaceful or secure. There had been arguments, emotional distance, and repeated questions about whether Mito was truly focused on the relationship. Debby's friends and family had also expressed concerns about his intentions. That does not prove they were right about everything. But it meant Debby was not entering this chapel without warnings around her. Before the chapel scene, Debby explained that things had started improving because she had stopped bringing up heavy topics. On the surface, that sounds understandable. Sometimes couples need a short break from constant fighting. But there is a huge difference between taking a pause and avoiding the one conversation that decides the future of the relationship. Debby wanted to know whether Mito was committed to marriage. Mito wanted space to pursue acting and adjust to life in America. Debby needed reassurance before investing more money and energy into his career. Mito appeared to feel that relationship pressure was blocking the life he imagined for himself. One person wanted certainty, the other wanted freedom. And neither seemed able to explain those needs without making the other person feel threatened. On screen, Mito met with a talent representative and talked openly about his acting dreams. He said he wanted to reach the level of major Hollywood stars. The representative told him he would need stronger English skills and acting classes before he was ready for representation. Mito did not appear discouraged. In fact, he looked energized. He came home excited to tell Debby about the opportunity. Then Debby brought the conversation back to their relationship. She made it clear that she could not simply pay for classes while they still did not know where they stood as a couple. That was a fair concern. Supporting a partner is one thing. Funding someone's dream while wondering whether that person plans to stay with you is something very different. But the real problem had not come out yet. Then, Debby decided to take action. She found a small chapel and brought Mito there as a surprise. Inside, she told the venue owner that they were considering getting married in around 3 weeks, because they were on a fast track. Mito looked deeply uncomfortable. He said he did not like being rushed, he did not like the pressure, and he clearly did not like learning about the visit after they had already arrived. The conversation became serious when the chapel owner gave them privacy. Debby asked what was wrong. Mito finally said he thought it was time to return home. Then, after Debby demanded an explanation, he said he could not find himself there. That was the immediate result. Debby went from planning a wedding to crying outside the venue. Mito went from discussing Hollywood to questioning whether he should remain in America. On the surface, this argument was about a wedding chapel. Debby believed they needed to start planning. Mito believed she was pushing him into a decision. But underneath that visible argument, the real problem was trust. Debby did not trust that Mito was in America mainly for their relationship. Mito did not trust Debby to give him enough time and freedom to make his own decisions. Once trust disappears, even normal conversations start feeling like tests. That is exactly what happened here. Debby did not simply sit down and ask, "Do you want to marry me?" She created a situation where Mito had to react inside a chapel, in front of another person, with a 3-week timeline already being discussed. In her mind, this may have felt practical. The visa clock was moving. They could not stay in limbo forever. But emotionally, it also functioned like an accountability test. Debby wanted to see whether Mido would step forward or step back. And Mido stepped back so hard that he started talking about leaving the country. Debby's concern was not unreasonable. She had every right to ask whether Mido was committed. She had every right to question why he showed so much passion for acting, but so little enthusiasm for marriage. She also had every right to protect herself financially. If Mido wanted her help paying for English and acting classes, she needed to know whether they were actually building a future together. The problem was how Debby handled that fear. She had already admitted that she was avoiding serious conversations to keep the peace. That may have reduced the arguments for a few days, but it did not create real progress. It only pushed the tension underground. Then, instead of slowly reopening communication, she jumped from avoiding heavy conversations to presenting Mido with a possible wedding venue. That is a massive emotional swing. One day, the message is, "Let us not discuss anything serious." The next day, the message becomes, "We may be getting married here in 3 weeks." For someone who already feels uncertain, that can feel less like a conversation and more like a trap. Now, that does not excuse Mido's coldness. It does not mean Debby created his lack of commitment. But it does show that Debby may be trying to manage uncertainty through action. When she cannot get the answer she wants emotionally, she moves the relationship forward physically. She talks about venues, she talks about timelines, she talks about what must happen next. The danger is that physical movement can create the illusion of emotional progress. A couple can visit a chapel and still be emotionally disconnected. They can obtain a marriage license and still avoid the biggest questions. They can even get married while remaining trapped inside the same unhealthy pattern. And this may be Debby's biggest blind spot. She seems to believe that once Mido takes the next step, the uncertainty will disappear. But commitment does not become real just because there is a deadline. If one person remains emotionally undecided, the wedding does not remove that problem. It carries the problem into the marriage. There may also be a deeper emotional reason behind Debby's behavior. She has invested years in this relationship. When someone invests that much time, hope, money, and emotional energy, walking away can feel like admitting that all of it was wasted. So instead of asking, "Is this relationship healthy right now?" the person starts asking, "How do I make this work after everything I have already given?" That does not make Debby foolish. It makes her afraid. But fear can still lead someone into decisions that ignore what is happening directly in front of them. And then Mido made one statement that completely changed the meaning of their argument. Mido said he could not find himself in America. That wording matters because it was not a direct statement about love. He did not clearly say he did not love Debby. He did not clearly say he would never marry her. Instead, he connected his unhappiness to his life in America. There are several possible explanations, but these possibilities should be treated as analysis, not confirmed facts. One possibility is homesickness. Moving countries can be emotionally brutal. A person loses familiar language, friends, work, independence, and daily routines. Debby has publicly defended Mido by pointing out that he gave up a lot to relocate. That is an important part of the story, because viewers should not act as though moving across the world is easy. Mido may genuinely feel lost. But there is another possibility. He may feel disappointed by how different his American experience is from what he imagined. Mido appeared to see America as a place where his acting career could grow. Instead, he was told that he needed English classes, acting lessons, and more preparation before he would be ready. That does not make his dream impossible. But it does make the path slower, more expensive, and far less glamorous than he may have expected. A third possibility is fear of marriage. The chapel made the deadline real. Until that moment, Mido could discuss the future using vague language. Inside the venue, he had to imagine an actual ceremony taking place within weeks. The pressure was no longer theoretical. And yes, some fans believe his wording may have been strategic. A section of the audience believes saying he could not find himself there left room for negotiation. It allowed Mito to suggest that the problem might not be Debby. The problem could be New Orleans, his career, his lack of independence, or his limited opportunities. Some viewers believe that wording could eventually support a request to move somewhere closer to the entertainment industry, possibly Los Angeles. But that remains a fan theory. The episode did not prove that Mito was deliberately manipulating Debby into relocating. What the episode did show was Mito creating even more uncertainty. His initial concern was not completely unreasonable. Being surprised with a chapel visit would make many people uncomfortable, especially when the relationship had already been unstable. He had the right to say he was not ready. He had the right to ask for a private conversation before a wedding date was discussed with a venue owner. But emotionally shutting down was not a solution. When Mito introduced the possibility of leaving and then went quiet, Debby panicked. Her reaction became intense because he introduced the biggest possible threat and then stopped explaining himself. That is a damaging communication pattern. One person says something explosive, the other becomes desperate for clarity. Then the first person withdraws even more. This gives Mito emotional power, whether he intends to have that power or not. Debby becomes the person chasing answers. Mito becomes the person deciding how much information she receives. That imbalance had already appeared earlier. Debby wanted him to say he loved her. She wanted a proposal. She wanted visible excitement about getting married. Mito controlled whether any of those things happened. The more he held back, the harder Debby appeared to work for reassurance. At the same time, Debby controlled other forms of power. She had the home, the money, the local support system, and the ability to help Mito pay for classes. Both people had leverage, but they were using different kinds. Debby's leverage was practical. Mito's leverage was emotional. That is why their conversations felt so tense. They were not only discussing feelings, they were negotiating security. Debby was essentially saying, "I will support your future when you prove that I am part of it." Mito appeared to be saying, "I cannot commit to your version of the future while I feel that I am losing myself." Neither message is automatically evil. But together, they create a relationship where love starts to feel conditional. The turning point came when the conversation stopped being about wedding timing and became about Mito's departure. Before that moment, they were arguing over pressure. After that moment, they were questioning whether Mito would remain in the country. Once the possibility of leaving enters a relationship argument, it becomes extremely difficult to return to normal. Debby was no longer only asking, "When are we getting married?" She was asking, "Are you about to abandon this entire relationship?" Mito was no longer only asking for more time. He was questioning whether this life was even right for him. That is why this scene was much bigger than a disagreement at a chapel. Online reaction appeared deeply divided. Some fans feel Mito showed exactly where his priorities were. They point toward how excited he became while discussing acting, compared with how flat and distant he appeared when Debby discussed marriage. For these viewers, that contrast explains the entire relationship. They believe Mito appeared emotionally alive only when the conversation involved his career. Many viewers are also saying Debby ignored warning signs that were already obvious. She knew Mito struggled to express love. She knew he had not given her the proposal she wanted. She knew he became uncomfortable during relationship conversations, yet she still brought him to a chapel and started discussing a 3-week timeline. From that perspective, some fans believe Debby was not truly blindsided. They think she was shocked because the future she imagined finally collided with the behavior Mito had already been showing. Other viewers defend Mito on one important point. They argue that even a committed partner might react badly after being taken to a wedding chapel without warning, especially following weeks of conflict. These viewers believe Debby used the approaching visa deadline to force a decision instead of creating a calm and private conversation. Then there is a third section of the audience. These viewers believe neither person is handling the situation well. Debby pushes harder whenever she feels insecure. Mito withdraws further whenever he feels pressured. His withdrawal makes Debby more anxious. Her anxiety makes her push again. Neither person breaks the cycle. Of course, fan opinion should never be treated as confirmed fact. Viewers only see edited scenes, and reality television does not show every private conversation. Debby herself has publicly asked people not to judge Mito entirely through the worst moments shown on television. That does not mean the scenes are meaningless. It simply means we should analyze the behavior without pretending we know every private motive. And the pattern shown on screen is concerning. Debby repeatedly asks for emotional certainty. Mito repeatedly gives vague answers. Debby lowers her expectations to restore peace. Then, when the deadline becomes impossible to ignore, she takes dramatic action. Mito feels cornered and threatens to leave. Debby becomes emotionally overwhelmed and starts chasing reassurance again. This is a pursuit and withdrawal pattern. The pursuer believes more conversation will create safety. The withdrawer believes less conversation will reduce conflict. Both people are trying to protect themselves, but both are making the other person feel worse. Debby's pursuit may make Mito feel that he is not allowed to be uncertain. Mito's withdrawal makes Debby feel that her fear is not important enough for him to address. That is why every new argument becomes more painful than the previous one. There is also growing resentment beneath their conversations. Debby appears to resent how much energy Mito gives to acting. Mito appears to resent how often his relationship is connected to conditions, deadlines, and expectations. If they do not address that resentment directly, even positive developments can create another argument. If Mito receives an acting opportunity, Debby may wonder whether he is using their relationship to build his career. If Debby asks for more romance, Mito may hear another demand. If they discuss moving to another city, Debby may feel she is making another sacrifice. Mito may feel that she never truly supported his dream. The subject keeps changing, but the emotional pattern remains the same. And here is the most important part. Credible reporting indicated that Debby and Mito later married. That means the relationship continued after this scene. But marriage records only tell us that a wedding happened. They do not tell us whether trust improved, whether communication changed, or whether the same resentment followed them into married life. A marriage can confirm legal commitment. It cannot automatically confirm emotional security. For this relationship to improve, Debby and Mito must separate 3 conversations that have become dangerously mixed together. The first conversation is about love and commitment. Do they both genuinely want the marriage? The second conversation is about money. Who will pay for acting classes, English lessons, travel, and their daily life? The third conversation is about location and identity. Can Mito build a meaningful life in New Orleans, or does he imagine his future somewhere else? Right now, all 3 issues are being discussed together. That makes every question feel loaded. When Mito talks about acting classes, Debby hears a question about whether he is using her. When Debby talks about marriage, Mito hears a question about whether he must give up control over his future. When Mito talks about leaving America, Debby hears proof that she was never his priority. They cannot solve anything until they stop using one issue to answer another. Debby needs a clear commitment that is not dragged out of Mito during a crisis. She needs to hear what he wants when there is no chapel, no immediate deadline, and no request for money. Mito needs to explain what finding himself actually means. Does he need more time? Does he need work, friends, independence, or a different city? Or does he simply not want the marriage? Vague language may protect Mito in the moment, but it keeps Debby trapped in uncertainty. They also need clear boundaries around financial support. Debby should not pay for Mito's classes because she is afraid that he will leave. Mito should not offer romantic reassurance because he hopes she will pay. Even the appearance of that kind of exchange will damage trust. As for what may happen next, predictions must remain clearly labeled. Because public record reporting later indicated that Debby and Mito married, it is reasonable to predict that Mito will soften his position after the chapel scene. He may explain that he felt overwhelmed rather than fully ending their relationship. Debby may accept that explanation because she wants to believe they can still make the relationship work. It is also possible that they reach a compromise involving Mito's career. Maybe Mito agrees to continue with wedding planning while Debby agrees to support English or acting classes. Maybe they discuss moving somewhere with better career opportunities. Maybe Mito finally gives Debby the proposal or emotional reassurance she has been waiting for. But none of those possible developments were confirmed by this particular episode. And the more important prediction is emotional. Debby may accept a temporary moment of reassurance without receiving lasting behavioral change. If that happens, the couple can still get married while the original relationship problem remains untouched. And if the original problem remains, it will return. It may return when money becomes tight. It may return when Mito wants to audition in another city. It may return when Debby asks why he still avoids emotional conversations. It may return when family members question his intentions again. It may return at the tell-all, when both of them are asked to explain what really happened inside that chapel. The rest of their storyline may focus less on whether they can physically reach a wedding, and more on what each person expects that wedding to provide. Debby may see marriage as proof of love and security. Mido may see marriage as one part of a much larger American future. If those expectations are not the same, the ceremony may create a legal bond without creating the emotional partnership Debby expects. My final verdict is that neither person was completely right, and neither person was completely innocent in this argument. Debby's concern was valid. She needed to know whether Mito was committed before investing more money, time, and emotion into his American dream. She had every right to question why acting brought out his excitement while their relationship brought out hesitation. But her delivery was damaging. Avoiding serious conversations and then surprising Mito with a chapel was not healthy communication. It turned a private relationship decision into a high-pressure moment. Mito's feelings were also understandable. Relocating can create loneliness, identity loss, and disappointment. Being surprised with a wedding venue could make almost anyone feel pushed. He had the right to say he was not ready, but his avoidance made everything worse. Saying he might return home and then shutting down left Debby in a state of panic. If Mito did not want the marriage, he needed to say that clearly. If he only disliked New Orleans or felt lost in America, he needed to explain that clearly too. The biggest red flag was not one sentence. It was the repeating pattern. Debby keeps searching for proof. Mito keeps delaying the answer. Debby pushes harder. Mito withdraws further. Then both of them act surprised when the relationship reaches another crisis. The reported marriage makes this story more complicated, not less. It tells us that they moved forward. It does not tell us whether they moved forward in a healthy way. Maybe Mito's chapel breakdown was only a temporary panic reaction. Maybe he later gave Debby the reassurance she needed. Maybe the two of them had meaningful private conversations that viewers never saw. But there is also another possibility. They may have reached the wedding without fully resolving the reasons Mito wanted to leave. And that is the question that matters most. Did Mito genuinely choose the relationship, or did the pressure of time push both of them into a decision? Did Debby receive real commitment, or did she accept just enough reassurance to keep the wedding alive? And when Mito said he could not find himself in America, was he asking Debby for support? Was he asking for a different life? Or was he quietly admitting that the future Debby wanted did not feel like his future? In this argument, who was more reasonable? Was Debby right to force a decision because the visa deadline was approaching? Or did the surprise chapel prove that she was trying to control the outcome? And do you believe Mito genuinely wanted to save the relationship, or was he already emotionally checking out? Share your opinion in the comments, and subscribe for more 90-Day Fiancé commentary, relationship analysis, and reality TV drama.